Well, good morning. I'm Jada. I'm one of the pastors here at Crossview, and we are very glad that you are here today. You know, we are in our second week of a sermon series called Wired for Connection. And recently, one of mine and John's friends posted on his Facebook page this quote. It says, "The opposite of poor is not rich, it's community." Each of us, we're innately wired and created for community. Last week, Pastor John, he stressed to us the importance and the necessity of how we are uniquely wired for relationship. Relationships with God, with those in our faith community, with others in and outside of the church. And one way to build and develop these relationships is through hospitality. So what is hospitality? Well, when I get into discussions with hospitality, with friends over coffee or after some events I've spoken at, sometimes I see little beads of sweat building up on people's foreheads. It's a word that sometimes stresses people out and freaks them out a little bit. Unfortunately, our society as a whole has brought with it connotations of this word, feelings of performance and pressure and perfectionism, when in reality, hospitality is simply being present in someone else's life, providing a welcoming environment, and participating in supplying another's basic need. At its simplest definition, hospitality is defined as opening your home to provide shelter, food, and a haven to those who need it. Hospitality has been kind of taken hostage by our society. And instead of just becoming and being a welcoming environment, it's now related to entertaining. As a result, there's a big business in the hospitality industry. Not that that's necessarily bad, but I think people like Martha Stewart and others, they've really kind of ruined the heart of hospitality, the spontaneity of hospitality, and even the lifestyle of hospitality. It's caused us to take our focus off of people and purpose and instead put it on environment and expectations. But you see, hospitality has very little to do with entertaining, especially if entertaining's goal is to impress others instead of serving others. Hospitality flows from a hospitable heart, and it's more about opening our hearts and our home instead of impressing others with our entertaining skills. In fact, Karen Maines, who is an author, she says that hospitality has nothing to do with impressing people, but everything to do with making them feel welcome and wanted. If we do nothing but make people feel that we are glad to see them, we've gone far beyond this world's norm. Entertaining focuses on food and facilities. Hospitality focuses on the person and their needs. True hospitality is sacrificial, sometimes uncomfortable, and it does not ever seek to impress others. To me and to our family, hospitality is not an event. It's a way of living. It's part of our lifestyle. It's an extraordinary way of living and treating those for whom we come in contact with in our normal, ordinary lives. And there's no denying that hospitality and love go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other. And sure, there are outward expressions of hospitality that can be performed, but if it's done without love, it's a pseudo-hospitality. For at its essence, hospitality is love in action. And in the Bible, if we're going to just break it down to the original Greek, in Romans 12, when hospitality is mentioned, this philoxenia, it means the love of a stranger. And in the Old Testament, hospitality is framed as a means of honoring and loving God by meeting the needs of the poor. Throughout the Old and the New Testaments, we see snapshots and expressions of hospitality. And right now we're going to look at one passage in 1 Peter chapter 4, starting at verse 7. It says, "The end of all things is near, therefore be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as the one who speaks the very words of God. And if anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever. Amen." I thought it was very interesting to note. He says to love each other deeply and to offer hospitality. And then he begins discussing the gifts. Because oftentimes, I've heard people say, "Oh, well, I don't have the gift of hospitality," thinking they're off the hook. But the fact of the matter is as Christ followers, when we identify ourselves as a follower of Jesus Christ, we all are commanded to practice hospitality. Some of us may be endowed with a greater portion of a gift and unique personalities and wirings that maybe makes it more natural, more simple, just kind of it happens naturally for our lives. But as Christ followers, we are all called to practice hospitality. But first, in this passage in 1 Peter, it says we are to love each other deeply. Why? Because love covers a multitude of sins. And loving others when things are tough and when things are difficult, that is important. One theologian states, "The community that loves one another is able to forgive one another more rapidly when minor issues arise." So we're to love each other deeply, and we are to offer hospitality. How? Without grumbling. In this passage, it's clearly communicated that hospitality is a specific example of loving one another. Simply put, hospitality and love go hand in hand, and by receiving others into our homes, making them feel welcome, meeting their needs, and providing for them a place of fellowship and acceptance. This is hospitality. And this hospitality formed the very foundation of the Christian movement. Throughout the Bible, we see glimpses of hospitality. But at times, these outward expressions are without the heart, without the love. They're just simply actions associated with outward expressions. And one can do acts of hospitality for others without having a real and genuine concern or love for them. In the book of Esther, in chapter 1, we see Xerxes, who was the king of Persia. We read about him in verses 3 through 9, and here Xerxes is throwing lavish banquets for nobles and military officials of his enormous empire. But Xerxes' intentions were mostly self-serving and for his own glory. As well, in Genesis chapter 31, we read about Laban, who hosted his nephew Jacob. He hosted Jacob for nearly 20 years. Now, were his expressions of hospitality done out of a genuine concern for his nephew? I'm inclined to think that it possibly had more to do with cheap labor than showing love. So as we see in the Bible and even today, there are acts of hospitality that can be done without a genuine concern for others. But this is a pseudo-hospitality. This is not biblical hospitality, and this is not how we as Christ followers are to show and to live hospitality in our daily lives. But if we consider other passages in the Old Testament, we discover that hospitality is one of the most prominent forms of giving. You see, God's people, they were required to do so much more than merely sharing a meal with others. That's how we pretty much associate hospitality in our day and time. But see, Israel's law, it contained extensive programs and provisions mandating the care for the alien, the poor, even granting them legal rights, which is a provision that was not found to such an extent in any other culture of that time. You can read more about this if you want to jot it down in Leviticus 19, in Leviticus 23, and in Deuteronomy 24. In Romans 12:13, we read, "Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality." And it's actually right here in Romans, in this verse, where we were talking about the Greek word for the love of strangers. This is hospitality. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Practice the love of strangers. Practice hospitality is a command for all believers. It's not a gift that just a few receive. We are called to be imitators of Christ. And in my reading, in my study, Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of hospitality, sharing his very life with us. So when we shut our homes and our hearts to those around us, we're making the decision not to be imitators of Christ. But if we look in the book of Acts, we see how the early church, they sold their possessions and their properties, and they shared their monies with those in need. They were exemplifying love in action. And unfortunately today, we get busy, we get caught up in our own lives. Sometimes we get blindsided to those even sitting around us here today. And rather than caring for the needy and holding one another accountable and daily breaking bread, as they did in the early church, I have to wonder, have we neglected hospitality? And I think perhaps that this dilemma has greatly diminished the power and the effectiveness of the church. Not the little C church of Crossview, but the big C church of Christians gathered around the world. Biblical hospitality, how we are taught to live daily in our lives. It's born from a generous spirit and a genuine concern for others. And then it's reflected in outward expressions and practices. And this is especially true for us who call ourselves Christ followers. If we continue to read in Romans 12, verses 9 and 10, it says, "Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with a genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other." Upon love. And at Crossview, our mission is to love God and to love others. And practicing hospitality, it's just one way that we can fulfill that mission. And there are a few things that we believe about hospitality. We believe that hospitality is giving something that we like, the way we want things. So it's giving up something that we want in order to make someone else feel at home. We believe that hospitality calls for us to be purposefully present with another, actively listening, and meaningfully responding to what others say, both verbally and non-verbally. We believe that hospitality is when we generously and selflessly share ourselves and all that we have with others, and then not expecting anything in return. Hospitality is accepting interruptions as divine appointments to serve and to love others. In her book, Bread and Wine, author Shauna Niequist, she shares, the heart of hospitality is about creating space for someone so they feel seen and heard and loved. All of us have an innate desire to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved. It doesn't matter if you're single or married, if you're young or young at heart, if you're an introvert or an extrovert. As Christ followers, we are called to practice hospitality. And there are many ways that we can do this in our everyday lives that work for us, our families, our schedules, our routines, and even our unique personalities and wirings. Over the last few weeks, as I've been preparing this message, I have friends who are introverts, even though I'm an extrovert. And we came to the understanding that for different reasons, we all value something similar, which is alone time. I homeschool my kids, but in the 2 jobs that I work, I'm with people all the time. So I have my kids with me most of the day, and then I'm working 3 or 4 nights during the week with people. And man, I just need some alone time. But we all agreed that even though we need alone time, as Christ followers, we can't use that as a card to say, oh, I'm not going to practice hospitality because this is my need. Even for those of us who crave alone time and, to be honest, need it to function in a healthy way, personally speaking, we can find ways to practice hospitality. And although solitude is an important spiritual discipline to practice, as we heard about a few weeks ago, so is spending time in community with other people, developing meaningful and real and authentic relationships. And over the years, through the various seasons that our family, that John and I have found ourselves in, both before and after children, navigating work schedules and graduate school schedules, and then the arrival of kids, it threw some monkey wrenches in our lives, but we have developed a simple and a sustainable approach to practicing hospitality. We're continuing to graciously embrace our unique selves, how God has wired us, our differing personalities, and our simple surroundings, realizing that we can regularly welcome others into our home without stressing out and without breaking the bank. And learning to resist comparison and competition and consumerism. Because all of these, they try to prevent us from opening our hearts and our homes and ourselves to other people. You know, folks, we were not meant to journey in life, but especially in our Christian faith as lone rangers. We've got to stop that. Not just you, but again, the church in general. We need each other. Whether you know you need each other, we need each other. And practicing hospitality and figuring out how it works for us, both the Swanson family, Crossview Church, and extending out into other faith communities. It's a daily journey of letting go and remembering that all we have, it's not ours, it's not mine. It's simply on loan to us from God to steward and to share for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of the kingdom, and because we are called to be imitators of Jesus Christ. So how do we practice hospitality? How do we purposefully and simply live a lifestyle of hospitality? Well, I think the first way is you feed people. You just feed people. Invite someone over for a meal. There are 7 days in a week, 3 meals in the day, 21 meals in the week. We have to eat. And as my grandma said, if you're making soup, just add some more broth or water and another potato. Invite someone over. Pull up another chair to the table. Gathering around the table to share a common meal. This is a sacred practice. And as I was preparing to preach the sermon, I was reminded of the importance in my own life of how regularly gathering around the table with others has been. This is the setting where many transformational moments, important life decisions, it's where I talked them out and received clarity and wisdom from others who are sitting around the table with me. It's truly sacred space. Gathering around the table it's more than to sit down and receive nutritional sustenance. It provides opportunities for meaningful and engaged conversation. And it's a place where we can develop authentic relationships. Gathering around a table moves a relationship from an acquaintance to a friend. And in his book, A Meal with Jesus, author Tim Chester states, Jesus didn't run projects, establish ministries, or even put on events. He ate meals. Jesus knew this was a Great Commission practice. And it doesn't have to be stressful. It can be last minute, spontaneous, even for a planner like me. Oftentimes when I don't plan it, that's when it's the most enjoyable for me. And in our home, we keep it simple. I love to cook. Even though I'm a musician, music is my work, cooking is my hobby and where I feel most creative. I don't do arts and crafts really, but if you open up my pantry and my spice cabinet, those are my tools of my hobby. That's what I love to do. But when we invite people over on Sundays, we keep it really simple. 3 meals: spaghetti, soup, or jambalaya. That's just it. And usually it's because it can fit in the crock pot and we're here by 7 and it's just easy to do. But I rotate these 3 meals. And the irony upon ironies, somebody else does, well, they use spaghetti too. Just last week, Holly Moe sent this article to me, and it was about how this couple, they're not a couple of faith, but as human beings, they were missing connection and a slowing down and a rhythm to their week where they were gathering together with family and friends. So what did they decide to do? On Friday nights, they have spaghetti and meatballs. Every Friday night, they have spaghetti and meatballs. And you just RSVP by Thursday to where they know how many meatballs to make. And it could be family or friends or the neighbor down the street or somebody she met at the grocery store or a business colleague, young, old, you know? It's the gamut of people. And they just gather around the table and they have spaghetti and meatballs. And she says now it's gotten to be so big that they've started freezing the meatballs in advance. I mean, they have a ton of people show up. And it's gotten so big, because they put it on Facebook and that's how they get people to RSVP, that they go and see family. They went and saw family like 4 or 5 hours away, and they asked them to have their Friday night spaghetti feed at their house. Tons of people showed up. Folks, people are craving that connection. And for whatever reason, food is a way to draw people in. Jesus knew it was a Great Commission practice. We take our lead from him. That's one way that we can do it, is feed people. And the great thing about this couple, how they described their meals, it was totally right up my alley. They're intergenerational, they're kid-friendly, they're low-key, and they're cheap. It's not about impressing people. It's about getting food into their bodies, gathering them around the table to talk. And John and I, we have seen significant ministry take place over a simple meal. And to be honest, more significant than a formal church event or program. And as a result of realizing this over the years, we've completely redefined our philosophy of ministry, not just as pastors, but as Christ followers. And in turn, this has recreated our perspective on hospitality. And we've prioritized meal times in order to be able to regularly welcome people into our home. And this has not always been easy. I work 3 or 4 nights during the week. but we've had to purposefully guard this time. 2 or 3 nights during the week, not that we have somebody over 2 or 3 nights every week, but to where we have options of inviting people into our home. There are so many opportunities that are vying for our time, for our kids' time, for our attention, for our investment. It has required a certain level of sacrifice on all of our parts to set aside this time as sacred space. But we're committed to bringing back what we call the blessing of food. I'm from the South, and things revolve around food. But I've realized that was something in my childhood where people connected. And we want to bring back the blessing of food in our daily lives because we have seen significant conversations begin and relationships develop over a big pot of soup and a loaf of bread. People opening up and sharing their hearts and their stories. And we realize, not everyone is comfortable with this or in the habit of regularly inviting others into their home. But if not, we encourage you to start simply, but to simply start developing your own unique way, taking the first step to open up your heart and your home to others, where we not only share a meal, but we share ourselves, connecting at a level that's below the surface, moving beyond talking about the weather to talking about things that really matter, and daring to reveal who you really are behind the mask that we so often wear, and being okay with it. I know there are obstacles to overcome. Size of home, having a tight budget. Mine and John's first home was 400 square feet, and we didn't even have a table when we first got married. In fact, we wondered if we were going to have a place to live. A gentleman in our church had a little fourplex, and we moved in. Well, John moved in, then we got married, then I moved in. Make sure to clarify that. And but we still invited people over, even without a dining table. John's mom would regularly, we were in Louisiana, but she would regularly send us those big cans of clams, because I had never had clam chowder until I moved here when we were dating, and I was like, oh. So she would send us those Costco-sized cans of clams, and I would make clam chowder, and a friend would make a salad, somebody would bring a loaf of bread, and we would sit, around our little living room, because here's the kitchen, here was the couch, here's the living room, it was that small. And then one day, John came home from work, and he said, guess what? Mr. Tim has a table to give us. It was blue and black. I still remember it. The chairs are kind of rickety. But we had 4 chairs to invite people over for a meal and actually have a proper table to sit at. So we've been there. We've completely been there. And if it comes to finances, even expensive spaghetti is about $1.99 a bag. And you can buy a pound of ground beef, brown it up, or if you don't want to do that, buy the pre-made meatballs from Costco and a can of spaghetti sauce. You could probably feed 10 to 12 people for about $10. And that investment will reap significant rewards. You may never know the lasting impact that a simple invitation to dinner, to come over for a meal, has on someone. A week or so ago, I was talking with Pastor Josh, sharing with him a bit about this message. And I said, one time your grandparents invited us over for a meal. For those of you who don't know, John attended Josh's grandparents' church for years and years and years, and then he went on staff leading worship there. And when I moved up, Josh's grandma came up to John and I after worship services one day, and she said, I want you to come over for lunch. So I'm telling Josh that, and he said, well, he goes, you know about her, right? I was like, what do you mean? And he says, well, each Sunday morning as she was preparing Sunday lunch, she would pray for God to tell her who she was supposed to invite over that day. And she waited for God to tell, share with her who she was supposed to invite. And then she would pray for that person or that family or that couple. And he said, so not only did you get a good meal, you got prayed for. And you can know that God himself told her to invite you guys over. That was nearly 20 years ago. 20 years ago. When he shared that with me, it blew me away, totally amazed me, and it challenged me to do the same. But it doesn't have to be a formal meal. Maybe Maybe you're home in the afternoons. Maybe other kids in the neighborhood's parents aren't. Maybe you have a big box of snacks in the pantry or in the fridge. Maybe you're that house, the Kool-Aid house, as they called it when I was growing up, where the kids like to gather. Or maybe your kids have left home, but there's a senior adult or a single person in the church who doesn't have family near, or even a family who doesn't have their family nearby. There are so many ways and opportunities to invite people over for a meal, to connect at a deeper level, meaningfully and authentically. So you can feed people. And number two, you can house people. Offer someone a place to stay for a day, for a simple night, or a week, or maybe more long term. When we were church planting, there was a newly married couple in our church, and they had a big house. And they'd been praying, God, how can we serve you through this? And they invited a family to live with them for a longer amount of time. And there were ups and downs and issues, relationships are messy. People are messy. We have our own agendas. But you know what? They opened up their home. They saw their home as an opportunity to serve God, to love others. And they saw it as a resource for ministry. Or maybe it's just one night. When John and I traveled all over doing concerts, every night we stayed in a different family's home. Now that I've gotten older and I have a home, and then especially as we've had kids and they have routines and stuff, I realized what a sacrifice that was for all of those families, from one coast to the other, from north to south. But they did it. And I still keep in touch with some of them. Crazy, I know, but I do. And then when we moved back to Washington, we downsized our home. And we lost quite a bit of square feet, but what I really mourned is that we lost a guest room. But we got creative. We had a crawl space. And John said, we can turn that into a room. It had an opening about this and this. You could just barely squeeze through to take stuff in. He and friends dug out all the dirt. Some of you actually helped with that, doing the electrical work. Jason Rogers helped with the electrical work. We had another friend who laid the cement. And now it's kind of a multi-purpose room in our home, and we have a day bed in there and all the kids' toys. But we had to get creative in order to be able to host people in our home the way we wanted to, even though we didn't have a proper guest room. Some of you foster children, short-term and long-term, or adopt them. This is huge ways to practice hospitality and to share the love of Christ with other people. In my own life, my college church had a ministry to college adoptive, or to college students. It was college families, and they adopted college students mainly for a home-cooked meal or to wash clothes, because going to the laundromat is expensive. 22 years later, my college family is still in my life. I was at their home with 2 other college students, washing clothes and having a home-cooked meal and watching must-see TV. That's when NBC had must-see TV. And then I lived with them for a short time. Now their kids are 28, 25, and 21. And they're like another set of parents to me and another set of grandparents to my kids. Who would have thought when this family just said, hey, yeah, we'll take a college student, they got stuck with me for life. So we can feed people and we can house people. And another way that we can show hospitality to others is to listen to people. Be a listening ear. Purposefully listen to one another without distractions. You know that list that goes through our minds? Maybe it's just me. Asking thoughtful questions. And I've found that oftentimes after a meal, when everybody's still gathered around the table, people are more relaxed and they begin sharing deeply and revealing meaningful things about their lives and details about their stories. And in turn, we can share our stories together. Again, gathering around that table is sacred space. And my friends who are better listeners than I am, they've taught me a lot as an extrovert who likes to be the life of the party and engage in discussion. They've taught me to be a thoughtful listener. And one of them directed me to a site online, and it was just a brilliant quote. It's by author Julie Andreen. She's an introvert, and she was specifically discussing hospitality. She said, introverts are engineered for hospitality. We want to listen to others and to have them listen, really listen to us without distraction or meaningless chit-chat. We want the deep, real, authentic stuff. Those things, by and large, tend to emerge within a home where people feel safe to share their lives. It's about slowing down and carving out space, inviting someone over for a cup of coffee, tea, dessert, to watch the game maybe, and then being okay with diverting plans and figuring out what else can happen when we really listen, when we really engage with other people and hear their stories. You know, folks, it doesn't happen just on a Sunday morning. John and I love the fact that our church is so engaged with the greeting time. I mean, we've been to churches where they don't talk. And at second service, you know, when you're up here leading worship, people are talking and connecting, and it's wonderful. But you get right into a deep conversation. You're like, oh, I got to get back here. But oftentimes when we're together with people in our homes or at a coffee shop, we can really listen and hear their stories. Listening is a powerful tool of hospitality. And lastly, we can simply be aware of people. We are Christ ambassadors wherever we find ourselves. We are His ministers, no matter what our job title is, no matter where we work. And we are to be on mission 24/7, loving God and loving others. And in many instances, practicing hospitality simply means being available and being aware of those around us who need to be seen, heard, and loved. And in my life, sometimes I'm that person for others. Not that I set out to be, but a few years ago I learned this lesson well. I tend to be kind of task-oriented, and much more so than my husband. He's much more relational. And to be honest, after a day of homeschooling my kids and then having piano and voice students come and maybe a meeting or a rehearsal here at church or whatever, I'm pretty much peopled out. So if I need to go shopping or run an errand, I just want to get it done. And shopping is not my hobby. It's something I have to do to survive. And on this one occasion, I was headed to the grocery store. I had my list in hand. I knew the layout of the store. If I go here, here, and here, I should be in and out in maybe 15 minutes, depending on the checkout lines. Well, I was in the frozen food section, and there was a lady there, and she was kind of sniffling, and I thought she had a cold or something. It was kind of obvious. And you know how you just kind of notice those things? Well, I remembered I forgot something in the spice aisle, so I'm backtracking, going back to the spice aisle to get something, and she's there. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. Well, she was still sniffling, or so I thought, but then what I really discovered is she was crying. She was actually weeping by this point. And I looked over at her, and you know, of course, when somebody's kind of openly weeping in a store, they are trying not to be noticed, but you know. And I remember in just a split second, I'm having this argument with God, because for me, when I know it's the Holy Spirit telling me, hello, this is an assignment, this is one of those holy interruptions that you need to be okay with, my hands start sweating and my heart starts beating. And it's not because I'm nervous, it's because, oh, okay, God. Well, I was arguing with God, and I don't say that because I'm proud of it. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't have time to be that person that night. I needed some alone time. I wanted to go home, curl up in my bed, and just be. And God said, Jada, And so I looked at her, and I said, are you okay? And she said, no, I just lost my job. I haven't even been home to tell my family, and I'm here buying groceries. And she knew I couldn't solve her problems, and I knew I couldn't solve her problems. But we got into this great conversation, and I prayed for her at the end, got her name, and I said, would you mind if my husband and I bring over a box of food for you tomorrow? And she said, that would be wonderful. So the next day, Jaden and John took Jolie, that was her name, over a box of food, and John came home. He goes, you will not believe this. He's like, we didn't have time, but she invited us to stay for a meal. So here it is, this lady who had lost her job, buying groceries, maybe she wasn't going to have money for the next week, sharing her heart with me. And God gave me an opportunity to be hospitable there in the spice aisle of a grocery store to a complete stranger. I didn't have her in my home, but He clearly gave me an opportunity to invite her to share her heart. Today, there is a desperate need for Christians who will open up their homes and their hearts to one another, who will share their lives and their stories. Sometimes we limit ourselves because we just make hospitality too darn complicated. We get sucked into what our society tells us it's supposed to be. Perfect and about entertaining and using our best dishes. We have paper plates and our dishes have cracks, but I still use them. Hospitality is simply a chance to be together and to share. That is the stuff of hospitality. And if we wait until everything is perfect, we will probably never get around to sharing ourselves, our homes, our very lives with people. As we close today, I'd like to share Max Lucado's thoughts on hospitality. He says, long before the church had pulpits and baptistries, she had kitchens and dinner tables. Even a casual reading of the New Testament unveils the house as the primary tool of the church. The primary gathering place of the church was the home. Not everyone can serve in a foreign land or lead a relief effort or volunteer at the downtown soup kitchen. But who can't be hospitable? Do you have a front door, a table, chairs, bread and meat for sandwiches? Congratulations. You just qualified to serve in the most ancient of ministries, hospitality. Something holy happens around a dinner table that will never happen in a sanctuary. In a church auditorium, you see the backs of heads. Around the table, you see the expressions of faces. In the auditorium, one person speaks, but around the table, everyone has a voice. Church services are on the clock. Around the table, there is time to talk. Hospitality opens the door to uncommon community. And when you open your door to someone, you are sending this message: you matter to me and to God. You may think that you're saying, come over for a visit, but what your guest hears is, I'm worth the effort. No one can do everything, but we can all do something. We can start simply, but we can simply start. Begin where you are with what you have, inviting others into your real-time, ordinary lives, and then expect the extraordinary. Let's all throw aside our preconceived notions about hospitality and instead welcome folks into our homes, gathered around our tables to enjoy a simple meal and share our stories. That's it. That's simply